I know what time, how long y'all can survive without being near the bar or the wine, so I need to get started. Thank you for the great attendance. We've got some seats up here. Bram, if you want to get one with it's sort of like church here. We got a seat up here up front. I'm very appreciative of being able to have some time to share with you some of the things that make it so that I get excited and look forward to coming to work. And we always talk about Spring Island, how special it is. Kristen has summed it up. She says, yeah, just whenever you sit down, just say, Spring Island's awesome, period. And go on with it. One of the things that we do is we talk about our management plan. And I was looking back and I looked at how much we talk about what we do. But I wanted to take a talk where we just focused on the outcomes. In other words, we're doing this, so what happens because of that? And so I said, well, I'll pick 20 species and just use those to tell the story. Well, then I hit the 40s, so I kept narrowing it down. And so what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to take you on a trip to some different habitats. And if you look up here on the left is our original habitat map right there. We've got about 15 different habitat categories that we map out. And it's pretty confusing when you try to say, okay, what's going on? So what we did is we took those and we lumped them into some broader categories. And so we made our map a little bit simpler with fewer colors. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to do a transect across the island. And we're going to hit 6 different types of habitats. We're going to talk about forest with what I call subcanopy. That means it has smaller trees and shrubs underneath it. We're going to talk about pine savanna. A savanna is a place that's wide open, like a grassland with scattered trees. We're going to talk about hardwood bottom. That's not about being a hard ass, but that is a term the Southerners use for forest that's found down next to the river swamp, but is not actually flooded all the time. The maritime edge refers to the maritime forest that occurs right around the edge of the island. Then we have fields, and then the other habitat we have, which was too small scale to show on the map, are wetlands. So similarly, looking at the south end of the island, we have lots of pretty colors here. And with those 6 categories, let's just start our trip, starting on the edge of the island, working up. And what I did is for each of these habitats, I picked 4 species to tell a story about. They give you a little bit of a flavor for what that particular habitat adds in terms of the biodiversity of the island. Well, just to make sure we get started with something to get everybody's attention, of course we just have to start with a painted bunting. And this is a male, obviously. And one of the things about painted buntings is that they have a population through Texas, but there's one along the Atlantic coast. And if you can barely see that map, South Carolina is right in the epicenter of the breeding center for this eastern population. One of the things to keep in mind with painted buntings is they need 2 things. One, they love to eat green grass seeds. So by being at the edge of the salt marsh, they can go out and get grass there. And the other thing is those weedy places that look obnoxious with the tall grasses, they're favorite feeding areas. Secondly, they need a place to nest. So they need a shrubby area, or hanging Spanish moss is another place where they can hide their nest. The female's on the right, she makes the nest. The male sits around looking cool. The second one I want to put on this list is I want to illustrate to you the importance of food webs. And the fact is that there's some animals you look at and you go, oh, why did you put that on the list? I need, first of all, to explain to you, when we talk about, use the term rat on the island, there's 2 families of rodents that have the name rat. One of them is the old world mice and rats, and that's the wharf rat and the black rat. That's what you see in the dump. And if you happen to be like me, live near a port or the harbor, then you have black rats, which are arboreal, that'll go running through the top of your garage. Very popular with my wife and daughters. I don't really like it either, but I can blame on that. Then we have the New World mice and rats, and they're the ones that kind of look like gerbils in the face. And so one of the ones we have here, that Tony's done a trip on small mammals, and we have an amazing density of rodents out on places like Palmetto Point. And one of them is called, there's a cotton rat, and then there's another one right here running through the grass. I'm sure everybody found it. before I put that up. This is one that Tony had just released. And this one's called a Marsh rice rat. Now, you know I'm not going to give a program without giving you a name of an animal that has marsh somewhere in the name. But it is basically a semi-aquatic rodent. The baby on the right-hand side. Now, look, that's cute. And on the left-hand side, this is a picture by Tom Blagden, where we were out kayaking. And he said, I want to get some pictures of some rodents. I said, go out on a super high tide and go kayaking. And what happens is the rice rats have to get up on the top of the stalks. So when you find this little floating mats of rice, and he went out there in the summer and found this family. Can y'all see that there's 3 babies up there with the mama? And so these are extremely important, but if you look at their diet, they eat things like fiddler crabs and snails from the salt marsh, as well as insects and plant foods. Another animal that's characteristic of that maritime forest are the dragonflies. And this particular dragonfly is pretty, that's very useful, but it's one that gets dragonfly aficionados excited when they come to the southeast because it only lives next to salt marshes and brackish marsh. So this one is named Needham's skimmer, named after one of the leading authority in North American skimmers in the 20th century. And you see these all around the ponds. They're solid red. One of the things you have to keep in mind with dragonflies is they catch anything aerial. So that includes smaller dragonflies. So if you sit and watch them for a while, you'll often, these are one of the bigger ones, you'll see them catch and eat a smaller dragonfly. Now, another one that I put on our list for the maritime edge is because of the host. What the heck, you have to have some sex in the talk so we can at least look. This is 2 mating giant swallowtails. And if you can, the way you kind of get it is that the female is sitting there looking bored on the top, and the male is the one that's hanging upside down. He's actually got his wings down like this with his abdomen arched up, if you want to get your bearings there. And so these giant swallowtails are special because their host plant has to be a member of the citrus family. So when you go to Costa Rica, you go through Central America, giant swallowtails are everywhere. In Florida, they're common, and we're one of the northernmost places where they regularly breed. The plant that is native on the island, we locally call a toothache tree. If you look it up in the tree book, it'll call southern prickly ash. But if you chew up those leaves, you can tell it's got that citrusy taste. The other cool thing about giant swallowtails is the caterpillars defend themselves by looking like a bird dropping. So look down there on the right. That's a caterpillar of a giant swallowtail. One of the things to point out, and with many of these, it's very localized. I'm curious, these are the 2 places that the naturalists know where toothache trees occur naturally on the island. Is one near next to the 9th fairway, and then the other one is between the 15th and 16th fairway along the golf cart path right there. So if you find any other patches of toothache tree on the island out in the nature preserves, we'd love to know about it. But you see how these 2 spots make all the difference about whether we have giant swallowtails or not on the island. And that's one of our themes, is each locale helps add to things. Let's go into our second habitat. As we go from the maritime forest, we come up into an area that I'm calling hardwood pine forest with subcanopy. This was the forest with the subcanopy. And this is a majority of the island. And I want to talk about this because you are the stewards of most of the hardwood pine forest with subcanopy, because most of this property, most of this habitat is on private property. It's the home sites. And so I just wanted you to know who your neighbors are. I turned this sideways so it fit, but you see all the dark green on the island? All that dark green on the island is the forest with a subcanopy. So this can be nature curtain in many cases. And when we look at this, here's an example of a bird. I remember I've been here about the 3rd year. Rod Asbury called me and said, I've got a nesting bird. I went over and I went, great. And there it was. Everybody see it? This is a bird that nests on the ground. It was right there next to Cubby Rise Drive. And there it is. And to look at it, this is a Chuck-Will's widow. This is the big cousin of the whippoorwill. And as you can see, the back of it is designed to blend in with oak leaves and pine straw. This is actually a mother sitting on eggs. They just scrape out a place, lay the eggs, and the babies are adorable. This is the one. It's really fun to listen to them about 9 o'clock. At 1 a.m., 2 a.m., sitting outside your window. I know of somebody who was doing a collecting trip, and there was one outside the tent, and it's now in the museum collection. Chuck-Will's widows, I want you to look at this range map. See how they breed in North America, but they actually winter down in the Yucatan, Central America, and also the Caribbean islands. So these birds that are nocturnal, they spend most of their activity right there, what we call crepuscular. In the fact that they are flying around, they have to fly over the ocean to get where they're going. And this picture was taken from a ship, but it shows you the wings. So starting this week, they should be arriving. And if you're driving around a dirt road and all of a sudden it looks like a big moth flies up off the dirt road, the way I can go show them to almost anybody, like Tidal Creek is really good for me. If you shine up and you see a little rich spot, that's the eye shine from it. And that's how you see a Chuck-Will's widow. What's really important is Chuck-Will's widows are disappearing through much of their range because they specialize on eating big moths. And we think that the loss of these large moths are due to light pollution. So that these large moths are spending too much time getting around that, it disrupts them. I'm going to show you one of these moths in a minute. Here is, now notice that's on somebody's hand. This is called, these are cool when somebody brings them in. This is a hickory horn devil, is the name for this. This turns into that. And the other name for it is a regal or royal walnut moth. And this is an example, this is a family they call the Saturnid moths. This is the Cecropia moth, the Luna moth, the tulip poplar moth, the Polyphemus moth. They're all these large moths that fly around. And those Chuck-Will's widows feed at dusk and dawn, particularly because we know that they have to use their sight in order to look at them. So that's one of the things that when we talk about, oh my gosh, it's hard to find our way around Spring Island, the reason we don't want the lights up is nothing else, it's just to have these incredible moths on the island. I used to regularly see them, Luna moths, out on the river house and all, and once we built these buildings and the lights were around, I haven't seen a Luna moth for a while. So this summer I'm really interested in trying to map where we still have them around. Another common bird here, although I don't think we have that many pairs, but we have, I'm guessing at least maybe 3 pairs on the island, is the barred owl. This is a picture by Tom Blagden that he took. This is probably was one of Al Gerber's owls at the time. Many years ago, Al had these nesting in his nature curtain right next to his house where a big old laurel oak had its branch break off and made a hollow. So these nest in hollow trees. So when we talk about what's the benefit of leaving a big old hollow tree, I said as long as it's not going to fall in the house, I'm specifically interested in nesting habitat for barred owls. If you have a young forest, there's no place for them to nest. And the neat thing about barred owls is that in the summer, occasionally, I've seen the young along Spring Island Drive near the Bridge Road. That's a place to look out for them. I got this picture off the internet. It was so damn cute. But barred owls here hunt mostly rodents. But if you go inland to cypress swamps, they sit over a cypress swamp and they hunt for crayfish. And they dive into the water with their feet. I've watched them do this. And then tear their heads off and even feed the young crayfish. So, and here's another bird to illustrate the value of nature curtains. If you look into a nature curtain, this picture was taken in a nature curtain. You're looking face to face to a bird that's sitting on a nest. And this is the white-eyed vireo. And you can easily identify these nests because it's a hanging nest below the branch. So you have the fork, and you see how the nest hangs below? And it's got a lot of grasses woven into it. And this goes chick. Every nature curtain on Spring Island has its own pair of white-eyed vireos. They're extremely common, but they're very secretive. So, and you never find them. This has to be found in forest habitats. They like early successional stages, but you never find these, even in residential communities where they leave a lot of open patches. That doesn't work.
Do the call again.
I'm sorry. Let's check those. Yeah. Chick-pee-ro, chick. I can't do it that way, but it's a chick-pee-ro, chick. And it has a chick in there. All right. So, with that feeble attempt, we'll keep moving. And as we come out of these fields that characterize the lots, we come into come out of the woods, we come into these fields, and these fields provide another habitat. If you actually look at the fields, though, as you well know, not all fields are the same. So we get a lot of different habitats that serve different functions. One of the birds here, thanks to Carl Canzanelli sharing these, he took these in his driveway. And so you always have to watch the neighbors. But I put up the wild turkey here because the wild turkey uses a lot of different habitats. But when it comes to nesting season, the wild turkeys are the ones that need to nest in a field with high grass where there's scattered shrubs. Because what they're going to do is they're not going to just put their nest out in the middle of a broomsedge field. They need a pine bough or wax myrtle branches sticking out, and they'll stick the nest right up under the edge of that. So sometimes when you go by and you go, what is wrong with them? Why did they leave that field looking so messy with some scattered wax myrtles and all in there? We're specifically trying to keep a few fields to let them get a little bit old before the wax myrtles get too big for turkey nesting habitat. Turkeys rely heavily on acorns through the winter, and so they had a great crop this past year, so it's going to be very interesting. In 2015, we had almost, the crop before of fall 2014 and early 2015 was a horrible acorn crop. We saw almost no small turkeys. Here, so I'm really interested to see what happens this summer. One of the areas with interesting fields, if you look down on Straight Road, we've got some areas that we've plowed and we planted them in winter wheat. And the idea is that we want that winter wheat to come to seed in mid-April through the 1st of May. Because if we do that, we're able to attract the rice birds, is the common name. These are bobolinks. And so we will go out to the fields both below the waterfall farm, where we've got winter wheat planted, and those areas. And if you hear this little sound up in the trees, you sit and wait, and these birds hide in the grass, and all of a sudden flocks of bobolinks will come out. And these birds migrate from, you can see the map, they used to nest in tall grass prairies. That was their only place they were found when the east was all woods, but then that all became cornfields. But in the 1800s, they'd made so many hay fields in the east to feed the horses that bobolinks moved eastward into new territory and became an eastern bird in upstate New York and Vermont, places like that, because of hay fields. And so now that's a major area. From there, they have to migrate down to the pampas of Argentina every winter. So they're flying back and forth, and this is the bird that one of the birds that used to invade the rice fields in the 1800s, where they were concerned about the birds wiping out the rice at the wrong time, and they refer to rice birds, it's the bobolink. Now then, another field area is Covey Rise. And Covey Rise looks scruffy in terms of a field, but there's always a lot of different kind of plants there. And what that does is it attracts a wide diversity of butterflies. So Covey Rise is really our butterfly field. And I could have picked a lot of butterflies, but I decided to pick this one. This is a spice bush swallowtail. You see the swallowtails are the large butterflies with the little tips on the end of the wings, they call it swallowtail. It's a pretty butterfly, but what's really cool about is its larva. This down in Covey Rise, we've purposely allowed, there's a huge patch of sassafras. And so we let that sassafras get up to about 10 feet, maybe 12 feet, and that takes 2 or 3 years, and then we cut it all back. And then it'll get new shoots from it. And sassafras is disappearing due to this disease that came in that affects the red bag. But swallowtail butterflies, the spice bush, love it. And so that's where we get a lot of them. You can see how accurate the eyes are for this. When it raises up its head, the idea is that if you're a bird coming along and all of a sudden you look at something, this thing pops out and looks at you like this, and if you think it's a snake possibly, you'll jump back. That's the story the biologists have created. We're sticking to it for right now. Sure looks like the mini-me of something, I'm not sure. Another bird that is characteristic of Spring Island that I started monitoring in 1993 was the blue grosbeak. And the blue grosbeak, I think of as being a bird out in the wide open country. I felt like as long as Spring Island had blue grosbeaks, we were doing well to keep that that rural avifauna there. It's a bird that I learned a lot from, though, in the first 15 years I was here. Blue grosbeaks like weedy areas, and so I had the idea, I was told, okay, they want weedy areas, but they need some scattered shrubs. So we let a few wax myrtles grow up in the fields. And in the meantime, the edge of the forest, where it was getting thicker and thicker, between the forest and the fields, and the number of blue grosbeaks just kept going down, down, and down. They used to be right behind the nature center and some places like that. And so David Bishop joined us. You can see it's up here in the summer and in winters down in Central America. And what we did is we did something very drastic in 2005. We took the advice of our consultants who have been telling this for over 10 years, and they said, your forests are too thick. You need to manage your forest. And so this is Spring Island. And what we did was we came in and they said, all your trees are so crowded that they're not growing very fast. And if you want the forest to look like a mature forest, you're going to have to thin the forest down. And what you're going to do is don't take the big trees. Leave the big trees to keep growing, but take out the smaller trees and space them out. And so we picked we picked about 4 places on the island, and we did that. And this is an example of one. This is in 2005 before the timber harvest. And this is down on Big Neck, as soon as you come on Big Neck. And what I want you to see in this slide is that there's a lot of little oaks and shrubs, things with broad leaves, all right? I did not have any blue grosbeaks at this site. Then we came in, we harvested. Look at how few trees are left there. But the trees that are left now don't have any competition for water or for sun. And there's enough sun coming through that they're able now to get grasses. Because what you're trying to do is get grasses and those things like wildflowers. Because if you'd been here 200, 300 years ago, that's what a mature forest looks like, where there's regular fire. This is after 2 years. So you see how we've got this nice broom sedge coming in? Looks nice, not a whole lot of diversity, but here's the same spot 4 years later. When it got to this stage, the blue grosbeaks moved in and started breeding. So I had always thought of a blue grosbeak as a field bird, and I realized that it was really an open pine savanna bird throughout much of its range. And so we have multiple places on the island now where blue grosbeaks nest and breed on the island. I'll give you a preface to that, do a little plug. It has been 10 years since we've done a timber harvest. We've got some places now that it's time to do this again. We have got a proposal from our consultants about where to do it, etc. But it's very important, if I've learned anything from working for y'all, is y'all don't like surprises. So we've been putting some information out about we're interested in engaging everybody about the timber harvest and let people know what we're thinking and give a chance for input. So next Wednesday at 9 o'clock, I've got the hay wagon. If you want to go around and see the places that we're talking about going, let me know. But please sign up. So if it turns out we need an extra trailer, let me do that. Now then, in those areas that we've thinned out with the pines, we get these pine savannas. And pine savannas have their own particular types of plants and animals. What to keep in mind with these pine savannas, and for those of you that have been on any of our programs, we always end up talking about longleaf pine. But the thing I love about this map for the longleaf pine is, for the most part, it shows where the coastal plain is. The coastal plain being that area with very deep sandy soils that drain quickly, that have fire regularly. That one little thing that looks like a big wart on the back that sticks up, that's actually going up into the mountains of Georgia. Up there, longleaf pines are found up on the ridges where the lightning strikes the tops of the ridges. And one of the birds that is a telltale bird for pine forests is the brown-headed nuthatch. Nuthatches are the birds that can walk head down the tree. When you live in an area with a lot of young pines, you don't have any brown-headed nuthatches because they need to have dead trees to nest, or branches that are large enough they can hollow out a dead branch to make their cavity. They don't care how thick the understory is, though. So brown-headed nuthatches can be in your yard. If you've got a big pond, you probably have brown-headed nuthatches nesting in them. But they're characteristic of these pine savannas in particular. Another bird that we learned about was that prior to the timber harvest, we only had 2 places on the island where you might see a red-headed woodpecker. One of them was Bonnie Shore at the gazebo because it was open enough down there, and the other one was over on the southeast side of the island. After the timber harvest, the red-headed population on the island expanded dramatically, and it made me start paying attention. I realized when I started to go into old growth longleaf pine forest, like out of Webinol, I hadn't really paid attention, but red-headed woodpeckers are very common in these habitats. I just thought they lived in parks in Raleigh where they had oak trees. And so this is another bird that told us that the timber harvest, if done right, and well, actually improves the diversity of birds. Now there's a test here on this page, and that is I get a lot of calls about what does a red-headed woodpecker look like. So 2 of the birds on this image right here are red-headed woodpeckers, and 1 is not. Okay, so you all have to figure out which one is not the red-headed woodpecker. That is a red-bellied woodpecker. Red-headed woodpeckers, once they hatch, keep a gray head for their whole first year. But they still have that, what I call tuxedo pattern. You see that black with the white patches on the wings? That's the way to tell them. So there you go. That's the red-headed woodpecker. One of the special places as far as ecologists visiting the island is concerned is Big Neck. And Big Neck is a low-lying area. This is where we did the timber harvest. And what's special about it is it's so low-lying, they never farmed it. The water table was too close to the surface. And so throughout the time when you came to the island here in 1850, and you could look from one end of Spring Island to the other in the high, well-drained areas because of the sea island cotton, this place was never farmed. So it still has the original vegetation. It is the only place in South Carolina where slash pine savanna exists today. It's characteristic more of Florida, where it's protected. There's one other site, and it's on Daniel Island near Charleston, and it's slated for development. So there's a species of wildflower here that's in the aster family, that this is the only site that's found in South Carolina. So this is an interesting place. What I found interesting about it was I'm not Tony. I can't go out and just catch snake. Give me 45 seconds, I'll come back with a snake. But when I went out there, this was the area where I would catch king snakes coming. The king snake is the one that eats other snakes as well. So for people who hate snakes, they have to like king snakes. They actually eat a lot of things. Their favorite food is turtle eggs. They're burrowing around, but they'll eat anything that happens to crawl in front of them, if it's the right size. But there's something special about Big Neck that we find more king snakes out at Big Neck than other locations. This snake is declining, and we don't know why throughout the southeast. That's why Tony's so interested in them, and he's raising hatchlings and marking them to try to see if can you reestablish a population of king snakes in a place where they've left, where they've disappeared. So the king snake is one that get a lot of notoriety, and the main thing I want you to notice is the only all-black snake that has these either white or yellow rings around it. See how they loop around it? No other snake has that pattern. You can't give a talk on Spring Island about wildlife without putting in a fox squirrel. This one's just come from the bar. Abe's been mixing drinks for this one. Many times the fox squirrels are present, but they spend most of their day doing this because the more they're moving around, the more vulnerable they are to predators. So, particularly in the middle of the day, they're lounging like this. Now, one of the things I want to point out about fox squirrels, I know people have talked about the fact that, hey, I don't see nearly as many fox squirrels as we have in the past. We're all over that thanks to support for your donations to the Low Country Institute. Low Country Institute is the arm we use to fund our research projects. I had a conversation earlier this week with Dr. Ernie Nemours at the Nemours Wildlife Foundation, and they've got a graduate student starting to work on fox squirrels. So we're going to possibly be able to fund a summer intern that can expand the study to here. Keep in mind with squirrels, here's their cycle. They have abundant food through the late fall and winter. And then spring's okay, but in the spring all those oaks and hickories germinate. And so their time of starvation, or when things are tough, is the summer. If there's a lot of rain, they'll eat mushrooms. They'll eat fungi. They're also looking to raid bird nests to get a little protein, okay? But it's sort of the opposite from what you thought, and what I thought at least. And then late summer, early fall, the pine cones get big and green, and then those nuts, the seeds, are big enough in those green cones, and the cones haven't hardened yet, that you'll start seeing them eating the cones. And notice it's about the last of August, all of a sudden you'll start finding these piles of deconstructed pine cones all over the place. So that means that their time of hard times is over. When we say fox squirrel, I want everybody to appreciate the fact that the fox squirrel is found over a large area, but there's different color forms. And so the map in the lower right shows the different subspecies of fox squirrels that all look different colors. 3 of the subspecies are all in Florida, these isolated places. But throughout much of the Midwest, when you say fox squirrel, you're talking about the animal in the upper right that looks sort of colored like a red squirrel. This is one, they actually introduced that into Texas. And so when you get in certain places, you'll run into fox squirrels in places you never thought you would. The scientific name for fox squirrel is Sciurus, which means fox, and then Niger, because the first fox squirrels collected by Audubon were down in the southeast, and they were the black form. So Sciurus Niger is the southeastern fox squirrel, and as you know, the 2 color forms you have on the left are what we found in the southeast. No, they do not change color as they get older. They're born either gray with a black. The pattern that they're born with is one they stay with. So melanism, which is down in the lower corner there, is actually a dominant trait in many mammals. Now, when we move from those pine savannas, the open areas, there are certain places that are wetlands that have trees around them, and there may be a patch of open water in there as well. And they're often interdispersed within the habitats of the pine savannas. These areas are extra special. Of course, one of the birds we know well is the wood duck. Here's a picture from Tom Blagden that he took here. We call a place, obviously, called the duck ponds. The duck ponds originally were duck ponds because they would keep them dry in the summer, raise corn there, and have no water in them. Then they would plow. They would leave the corn, then they would flood it in late October, early November, so that they could sit the duck blinds and attract the ducks in. That was back when ducks used to come this far south. Then they would drain it by March to get it ready for the next growing season. We took it and shifted that flooding cycle because we didn't have a place for wood ducks to nest. And so what we do is we flood it in October. We keep it flooded through May so that the wood ducks can nest. And that's a shift that we did because when it comes to wood ducks, see here's the pond, duck ponds in different spaces. We do draw them out starting in mid-June through September because what we do get out there is we don't plant them, but we take the plow out there, so to speak. We take the tractor with a disc, and we want to make sure it doesn't become grown up too much. So we keep these open swaths like on the left, and that way when you drive down, there's a place for the ducks to land and also for you to see the birds. So about every 3rd year, each of those sections in those fields get disked under. The wood ducks, the babies, when they hit the water, their number 1 predator is largemouth bass. As they're paddling around, an alligator and a snapping turtle just sit and wait. So they may get some of them if they swim by. But largemouth bass, the big ones, can pick up those little pressure waves, and they're actively hunting the whole pond. And so that's why you don't see us putting wood duck boxes on all the golf course ponds or ponds that are stocked with bass. Because you go out there and you go, oh, we got 12. No, we got 11. No, it just sort of goes this countdown. And the biologist that came to help us said, you've got to put your wood duck boxes in a place with no fish. So that's why we shifted the flooding cycle for the duck ponds. What's interesting is sometimes birds and wildlife can kind of be like people who do collecting. They show you something, you go, it doesn't look like much, but that's the most valuable thing they have because of the history and it's an antique, etc. In our process of doing our flooding cycle for the duck ponds, we were attracting flocks of a bird known as a rusty blackbird. And I've seen these all growing up. But what happened is the biologists started calling us. They said, hey, we're here, are you getting rusty blackbirds? The rusty blackbird population in the 1980s and 1990s declined by 90% throughout the continent. And people had no clue why. So they were really interested in these birds, despite them not looking like a whole lot, although they got a cool stare. You have to admit that. You don't try to get into a staring contest with this, because the bird has a third membrane. All birds can just, wipe their eye, and never blink. So, rusty blackbirds, look at the breeding range. They breed up in the Canadian boreal forest, where you have spruce fir forests with these scattered little bogs. And so they're a forest nesting blackbird. And when they come south into the cypress swamps and the hardwood swamps of the south, they are the blackbird you find back in the woods. And so the fact that the duck ponds are wooded means that these birds move into this area. And what they do is they like to feed in areas where the water has receded. They are looking for aquatic insects, for things coming out of the water. They walk around in the mud. And so one of the things that we do is we'll flood an area in the fall and then start bringing the water down. And our flock is usually 60, 70 blackbird rusties here. And they'll go hunting those places along those wet leaves. When I kept the water really high, the blackbirds left. So we always have to be shifting the water level to simulate what happens in a natural swamp, which is the water gets flooded, then it drops, then it floods, and it drops. When you get 4.35 inches at one time, like we just did, nature helps you fluctuate the water quite a bit. The other wetlands that we have are what we would call borrow pits. I grew up with a borrow pit. The first thing I thought about is that's where you dig out dirt to use somewhere else. You're borrowing the dirt. I mean, are you bringing it back? I mean, just so. But of course, the first time I heard it was in eastern North Carolina, so it was a bar pit. And I said, what's a bar pit? Like a bear? No, a bar. A bar. It's a borrow pit. We have two that we've named Dragonfly Pond and Tree Frog Pond. Dragonflies are really neat animals to watch out. Here's more rampant sex. It's rough if you are a female dragonfly. What happens is there's all this competition for the female. The successful male finally clasps the female through the back of her eyeballs and often leaves puncture wounds there. And then he's got a hold of her, she can't let go. Then he bends around to deposit the sperm. And then what she's doing now is she's depositing the eggs one at a time, slipping them under the water. So, having said that, let's move on. This is, I won't say. This, though, to me, is one of the really special dragonflies of Spring Island. It has a large distribution range, but it's scarce within that distribution range. The state of Delaware has it on its species of special concern list. This is the largest dragonfly we have on the island. It's a darner, and it's called a comet darner, because somebody thought that the tail looked like, the tail of a comet coming out, and so it's about 5.5 inches long. It's about this big, and the only places that we've seen it so far are on the two ponds that are the borrow pits. And this comet darner picks an area that has to be fishless, and they don't do this clasping stuff. They just mate, and the female goes lays the egg. So you women like this one a lot more already than that green one. But I just wanted to show you what it looks like in flight about how big these things are. They rarely land, but they're usually in hunting. The darners are a family of dragonflies where the abdomen is so long that when they land, they have to hang vertically. The skimmers are a different family of dragonflies, and their abdomens are short, so when they land, they're horizontal. So most of the dragonflies you see around the golf course pond are skimmers. And this is another one that requires a special place, and we just find it in a few spots. Now, when we talk about wetlands, you also talk about all sorts of amphibians and reptiles, such as the amphiuma, the banded water snake, we've got a marble salamander, and we've got a chicken turtle with a long neck. But one of the ones I picked to talk about this time is this fat one right here. This sort of looks like the sumo wrestler of salamanders. This is one that's only found in the coastal plain. I had never seen one until I came to Spring Island. because when we look at this is a mole salamander because it lives most of its time underground. And I'm not sure if you can see that range map, it's sort of light gray, but it's basically from middle of South Carolina south. I'm from North Carolina, so it's not found there. And so these live underground, and they eat small invertebrates as adults once they leave the pond. What's neat about these, though, is that the larvae on the right-hand side is that if there's plenty of water around, they're one of the few species of salamanders that can decide not to become an adult form. And they just, I don't know if it sounds like any of the children you have living at home still. They're acting like an adult in all ways except for accommodations and where they're staying. But this one actually can be they go into the breeding stage. And so they can have complete their whole life cycle as an aquatic animal. And they're easily told, the other thing I like about it is one that I can identify. I'm not sure if you can see it, but in the mirror reflection showing the belly, they have two big white stripes down the middle of their belly. That's the only way, that's the only salamander to do that. And these are quite common in the duck ponds and those two other ponds that I told you about. So it illustrates the uniqueness of Spring Island. Now, one of the things that, when I got here, I remember people, biologists from the Department of Natural Resources saying, I don't understand why Spring Island has all these animals that you would find normally up the Savannah River. What are you doing out here? You're surrounded by salt water. You know, what happened? There must have been a heavy rain so that these animals could get across here so that it wasn't salty enough and they floated down the river or something to get here. And I pondered that and was teaching the Master Naturalist class, so I had to go back and learn more geology, and all of a sudden it dawned on me because I'd been in the Congaree, and then I went down to the Gillespie Trail and I realized it looked just like the Congaree. And then I remembered this story. And the fact is that this hardwood bottom habitat that we have is actually a relic population of habitat that's from the last ice age. Because 10,000 years ago, sea level was so low, the Broad River was cypress tupelo swamp. And right next to the cypress tupelo swamp, you have hardwood bottom forest. As sea level rose, it flooded out all the cypress swamp. Most of the hardwood bottom forest disappeared because it didn't have water. But because of the height of Spring Island and the fact that we have so much seepage, there is a narrow seepage zone in places around Spring Island that have continued to support the ancestors of the trees and all that have been here for the last 10,000 years. And one of the birds that requires hardwood bottom is a little nondescript flycatcher called an Acadian flycatcher. And it always disappears when it's anywhere near development. And because it needs large tracts of forest. And it sounds like it's sneezing. It goes, and it's a little one. And the thing I want to put this picture up, you can also identify their nest. You see how the nest is below the branch? It's not hanging with all the grass that I showed you with the vireo nest. But you can find these in the winter. And when it comes to Spring Island, there's 3 locations where breeding Acadian flycatchers still remain. And these are areas with hardwood bottom type forest. And so there was another place, and I said, oh, we can clear up the edge of the swamp there. And when we did, the Acadian flycatchers disappeared. All we didn't affect the area where they were breeding, but by removing the trees and let too much sunlight in, apparently, and they left that spot. So learn by doing. The other place, the hardwood remnant forest, that I said looked like the Congaree, is this strip up here that includes part of the Gillespie Trail. And when I go out there, I noticed that this was the one place where I came across a butterfly called an eastern comet. Can everybody see the butterfly in the picture? Right there. Outline. All right, so this one obviously is meant to blend in. The reason it's called a comet is on the side of the wing there's a little white mark that looks like a comet. This typically is found in northern forest, which is the kind of trees you have. They're like elm trees and northern forest. And so this is an example. They said not too common in the south, but we have them down here because we have this remnant forest that is typical of more northern species. The other thing is it illustrates that the woodland butterflies have a different life than the other butterflies. If you live in the woods, there's no flowers. And what they're relying on is they're eating sap, they're eating rotten fruit, and they're following and eating the droppings from raccoons that have been eating the fruit. Get a little extra fungus there, added as well. So the larvae are laid on either elm or the stinging nettles that are found around seepage areas. So this just illustrates how these little habitat areas increase the diversity of the butterflies we have as well. This is another bird that I get phone calls. I remember Jim Chafin calling me, said, "There is the most bizarre bird walking through my driveway right now." Okay, it looks like it's looking backwards. It's a fat, round, brown ball with a long bill, and it looks like it's drunk as it walks back and forth. And I knew immediately what it was. Notice again the pattern on this bird, how it looks like oak leaves. This is a bird that's found in a lot of different forest habitats, and it's likely during migration to show up in anybody's yard here or walk across your driveway. This is a woodcock. But woodcocks eat earthworms. And so that's why they like these hardwood bottom areas where it's kind of muddy. So what they'll do is they'll go down and feed in those areas at dusk and then go up in thick areas. The other thing they need is they need a forest where there's dense shade. They want to blend in. And so often when I flush them, it's out of a shrubby area where there's shrubs underneath a forest canopy. So you never know when you can see them. This map shows them breeding down here. That's not the case. Right along the coastal plain, they don't show up here. The earliest I've gotten is October 1st. But they're here in the winter. They probably are headed back north. I'm going to finish up with this bird right here. This bird also could be found almost anywhere on the island, but it particularly likes this hardwood bottom habitat because the leaves are nice and green, have a lot of caterpillars on them. And this is a bird that likes to eat caterpillars. We have a whole suite of birds that migrate through here. Notice where they nest. They nest up in spruce fir forest. So these birds are nesting in Canada, they're nesting in Maine, and then up through the very high Appalachian Mountains. And then they fly down and they spend the winter down in the Caribbean or in the Yucatan. So they're flying through our area, particularly in the spring, depending upon the headwinds. If they get strong north headwinds as they're crossing the Caribbean, they drop down as soon as they get to the coast. And so we will have them here in late April through the middle part of May. And they go zer, 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 zee, zer, 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 zee. But they look like they got a pretty neat little coat. The female just has this one little spot on the wing. So this is the black-throated blue warbler, and there's also American red starch. So this exemplifies that Spring Island has habitat that's important for migrants as well. So with that, then you say, what the heck are you doing? How do you manage for all this? What the Trust has is we have the island divided into management compartments. So when you see this map right here, I want you to understand that it's not one size fits all. People often ask me, they say, what makes Spring Island different? Is there a species that's found there that's not found anywhere else? And I say, no, that's not the case. But it's like a quilt. It's not, the fact is we have so many species in such close proximity that you can have this high diversity. And this is one of the things I really like to emphasize when I'm talking to people who are thinking about moving to Spring Island. I said, this is an amenity. We manage our nature preserves a lot like you would manage a golf course. You don't want every hole to be the same. So when you get out on the nature trails, the idea is that when you come around a corner, you're going to go into a different patch of habitat and to be looking at different things. The difference between somebody who's not ready yet or is not sensitive yet to nature versus someone that is when you talk to somebody who hasn't gotten into nature study yet, you tell them about a place, they say, oh, I've been there. But for a naturalist, that's like saying, oh, I've been to the cinema. I went to the movie theater. Okay? Well, I'm not going to the movie theater to see the theater. I'm going to see what the show is. And so our nature preserves provide the opportunity because of all these different habitats, and then you put different seasons on that you never know what the next show is going to be. So with that, I hope to encourage you to get out on the nature preserves and to take your time, walk slowly. Join us with our education program. So when you say, oh, they got a habitat safari, you go, oh, I've been on a habitat safari. You know, that's a different show coming on. there's so many things I didn't mention to you. I didn't mention bald eagles because we got a program. Tom Murphy's coming here the first Thursday of May. Hope you'll join us for that. And I purposely didn't even mention any plants. So we've got to do a whole program just on the plants as well. So with that, I'm going to finish, make sure there's time for a few questions, and thank you for coming and your patience.